Assalamualaikum dan selamat pagi. Anda bersama saya Nabilah, Khaleeda, dan ini Niaga AWANI. Kita mulakan dengan perkembangan berikut. Kerajaan akan memperkenalkan lebih banyak insentif baharu menerusi rancangan Malaysia ke-13 selain daripada pengagihan dana dan projek untuk merangsang ekonomi. Menteri Ekonomi Datuk Seri Rafizi Ramli berkata, insentif itu akan dirangka mengikut dasar yang diperlukan bagi memacu perubahan ekonomi tingkah laku dan masyarakat bagi menyokong transformasi negara. Berkata kepada pemberita selepas sesi libat urus bersama peserta industri untuk RMK13 di Ibu Negara, Rafizi berkata insentif itu akan dirangka berasaskan dasar yang diperlukan Malaysia untuk membantu peralihan selain bagi memudahkan perubahan tingkah laku yang diperlukan dalam ekonomi dan masyarakat. Ujar beliau, pendekatan baru untuk RMK13 akan memastikan insentif tidak hanya tertumpu kepada pengagihan sumber secara langsung, malah lebih menjurus kepada usaha mewujudkan ekosistem yang menyokong peralihan ekonomi ke arah lebih mampan dan berdaya saing.
Supaya RMK13 ini lain daripada yang lain. Supaya dia betul-betul mengubah struktur dan kita fokus kepada dasar-dasar yang mempengaruhi behavior of our society. So that's what we are trying to do. We are focusing on policy and program design that will have a long-lasting impact on our behavior. Our behavior, kesihatan ke, dari segi entrepreneurship, dari segi pendidikan and so on. So I'm sorry to say, insentif semua tu akan ada. Tapi memang is my wish that RMK13 ni bukan menjadi satu kitab insentif. It is actually a pivot of policy and thinking so that we can progressively influence behavior change because we need that behavior change.
Katanya RMK13 tidak lagi akan menjadi satu dokumen yang hanya menyenaraikan projek kerajaan seperti sebelum ini. Sebaliknya, fokus utama RMK13 adalah kepada dasar dan program untuk mempengaruhi tingkah laku yang diperlukan bagi menyokong transformasi struktur ekonomi negara. Pendekatan baru ini juga akan mengurangkan kebergantungan kepada pelaburan awam, sebaliknya memberi ruang kepada sektor swasta untuk melakukan peranan utama dalam memacu pertumbuhan ekonomi. Beliau berkata kerajaan akan terus komited untuk menyelaraskan dasar antara pelbagai kementerian bagi memastikan isu seperti peraturan yang membebankan sektor swasta dapat diselesaikan. Platform seperti sesi libat urus memberikan ruang kepada kerajaan dan sektor swasta untuk merapatkan jurang pemahaman serta membolehkan kerjasama yang lebih baik. Kerajaan katanya mahu sektor swasta menjadi pemacu utama ekonomi, manakala kerajaan sebagai fasilitator melalui dasar dan program yang menyokong. Kementerian Pertanian dan Keterjaminan Makanan KPKM menegaskan setiap isu berkaitan padi dan beras hendaklah dirujuk kepada pihak berautoriti bagi memastikan rakyat mendapat maklumat yang tepat. KPKM dalam satu kenyataan memaklumkan bahawa mereka sentiasa komited untuk mencari penyelesaian terbaik melalui pelaksanaan reformasi industri padi dan beras secara menyeluruh. Langkah itu juga katanya lagi bagi meningkatkan daya saing industri, memperkukuh kebajikan pesawah serta menjamin bekalan beras negara. Langkah yang bakal diambil bagi memastikan keberadaan beras putih tempatan BPT di pasaran akan dimaklumkan setelah perincian mengenainya dipersetujui oleh kerajaan. Kenyataan itu dikeluarkan sebagai respons kepada Ketua Task Force Pemantauan Kluster Makanan Majlis Tindakan Sara Hidup Negara Datuk Syed Abu Hussein Hafiz Syed Abdul Fasal yang bergesa kerajaan meletakkan portfolio padi dan beras di bawah badan itu berikutan kekurangan beras putih tempatan dalam pasaran. Malaysia akan terus bekerjasama dengan negara-negara lain dalam menangani isu perubahan iklim di sebalik keputusan Amerika Syarikat menarik diri daripada Perjanjian Iklim Paris. Menteri Sumber Asli dan Kelestarian Alam Nik Nazmi Nik Ahmad berkata pihaknya akan berkomunikasi serta meneroka kerjasama dengan semua negara bagi mencari jalan terbaik mengenai isu perubahan iklim.
Kita itu keputusan mereka, tetapi ialah seluruh dunia kena terus bertindak dan cari jalan untuk bekerjasama dan Malaysia akan terus berbincang dan jaga hubungan kita dengan semua negara-negara yang kita ada hubungan diplomatik lah, termasuk Amerika Syarikat. Saya pun dalam COP29 adakan pertemuan dengan dia punya Deputy Climate Envoy dan juga pihak Amerika Syarikat yang lain. Jadi kita akan teruskan komunikasi dengan pihak mereka. Pada masa yang sama, negara-negara yang lain kita kena tingkatkan usaha kita dan cari jalan bagaimana kita dapat memastikan kita dapat atasi ataupun membina satu masa depan yang resilient lah.
Tambahnya, selaku pengerusi ASEAN 2025, Malaysia komited meneruskan usaha dalam tindakan iklim dan memperkukuh kerjasama serantau selaras dengan aspirasi global. Beliau ditemui selepas merasmikan hasil Konvensyen Rangka Kerja UNFCCC, pelancaran laporan pembabitan Malaysia di persidangan ke-29 pihak-pihak UNFCCC COP29 dan laporan ketulusan dui tahunan BTR pada Khamis. Nik Nazmi berkata menerusi penyerahan BTR pertama pada 31 Disember 2024 kepada UNFCCC dalam tempoh masa ditetapkan, Malaysia muncul antara 85 negara daripada 198 negara yang berjaya memenuhi komitmen di bawah Perjanjian Paris.
MIDF Amanah Investment Bank berhad menjangkakan inflasi tahun penuh Malaysia mencecah 2.8% pada 2025. Didorong terutamanya perubahan dalam dasar kerajaan. Bank pelaburan itu dalam satu nota pendidikan pada Khamis berkata, antara perubahan dalam dasar termasuk rancangan rasionalisasi subsidi.
Inflasi utama Malaysia susut kepada 1.7% tahun ke tahun pada Disember 2024, didorong inflasi bukan makanan yang lebih perlahan. MIDF Amanah menambah inflasi bukan makanan terus menurun kepada 1.1% tahun ke tahun. Ia disebabkan deflasi dalam sektor pakaian dan kasut, maklumat dan komunikasi serta inflasi yang lebih perlahan dalam sektor kesihatan, rekreasi, sukan dan budaya, penjagaan diri, perlindungan sosial dan pelbagai barangan serta komponen perkhidmatan. MIDF Amanah juga mengunjurkan kadar dasar semalaman OPR kekal pada 3.0% sepanjang 2025 berikutan kekurangan tekanan permintaan yang ketara terhadap inflasi. Bank pelaburan itu berpendapat kadar ketika ini kekal menyokong pertumbuhan ekonomi Malaysia. Menurut laporan Jabatan Perangkaan Malaysia, kadar inflasi Malaysia bagi Disember 2024 menyederhana kepada 1.7% dengan mata indeks berada pada 133.4 berbanding 131.2 pada bulan yang sama tahun sebelumnya. Selain itu, semasa mesyuaratnya pada Rabu, Jawatan Kuasa Dasar Monetary Bank Negara Malaysia memutuskan untuk mengekalkan OPR pada 3.0%.
Baik, seterusnya kami akan teruskan dengan perbincangan di mana keluaran dalam negara kasar KDNK Malaysia dijangka berkembang pada 5.1% pada 2024 berbanding 3.6% pada tahun sebelumnya, kata Jabatan Perangkaan Malaysia DOSM. Pertumbuhan itu dipacu oleh pertumbuhan 4.8% pada suku keempat 2024 berikutan pertumbuhan lebih kukuh 5.3% dalam suku ketiga tahun sama. Ditambah dengan kepengerusian ASEAN tahun ini, bagaimana untuk kita meneliti asas penting ekonomi dan kita akan selami isu-isu tersirat dalam ekonomi Malaysia. Jadi kita nak tahu juga bagaimana dari tekanan inflasi ini yang semakin perlahan hingga kebimbangan terhadap pertumbuhan global, apakah cabaran kritikal yang perlu ditangani segera. Jadi kita akan bersama dengan Abdul Muiz Murhalim, pakar ekonomi MIDF Research. Muiz, Assalamualaikum. Mungkin yang pertama sekali kalau kita lihat kadar inflasi menurun kepada 1.7% bagi bulan Disember 2024, malah kadar inflasi teras pula juga lebih sederhana turun kepada 1.6%. Jadi adakah ini menandakan keadaan permintaan di Malaysia semakin perlahan atau mungkin bagaimana, Muiz?
Okey, Waalaikumsalam. Okey, kalau kita lihat dari segi bacaan inflasi ni pada satu sudut ianya masih dikira stabil. Walaupun bacaan pada bulan Disember tu sedikit lebih rendah berbanding pendapat di pasaran yang menjangka kemungkinan besar inflasi akan terus kekal pada 1.8%. Namun kalau kita lihat dari segi komponen, apa yang menyebabkan penurunan adalah komponen bukan makanan seperti pakaian dan juga perkhidmatan komunikasi contohnya. Tapi bila kita lihat dari segi data-data lain, masih terdapat tekanan harga kerana kalau kita lihat peningkatan bagi komponen lain itu masih menunjukkan pergerakan yang positif. Khususnya bila kita dapati tekanan harga itu masih terus berlaku kerana pada peringkat awalnya kami memang menjangka peningkatan harga makanan ini akan menyebabkan tarikan daripada peningkatan harga barangan bukan makanan yang lebih perlahan tu dapat diseimbangkan. Ini kerana kita dapati pada penghujung tahun lalu kesan daripada cuaca buruk khususnya menyebabkan banjir menyebabkan barang makanan seperti sayur-sayuran tu menunjukkan peningkatan harga. Cuma kalau kita lihat dari segi tanda-tanda, walaupun contohnya bacaan inflasi teras tu adalah sedikit lebih perlahan, tapi bila kita bandingkan dengan bacaan belian runcit contohnya, masih menunjukkan trend yang positif. Dan saya percaya trend ini masih akan kekal positif pada bulan Disember apabila data rasmi dikeluarkan. Cuma mungkin satu sudut tanpa kita sedar bacaan inflasi yang masih stabil dan sedikit perlahan ini mungkin memberi sedikit kelegaan. Oleh sebab itu kita dapati jumlah pembelajaran sebenarnya masih terus meningkat.
Jadi seperti yang Muiz katakan, permintaan ataupun belanjaan masih lagi orang kata positif dan memerangsangkan. Namun apa pula ulasan Muiz mengenai keputusan Bank Negara semalam yang mengekalkan OPR pada paras 3.0%? Apakah kemungkinan OPR akan diturunkan melihat kepada tekanan inflasi yang lebih perlahan pada ketika ini? Silakan Muiz.
Okey. Kalau kita sebut dari segi pelarasan OPR ini, memang dalam jangkaan kebajikan para pemerhati di pasaran, OPR ini akan dikekalkan kerana seperti yang dinyatakan tadi, inflasi itu nampaknya lebih sederhana. Pada masa yang sama sebenarnya kalau kita lihat pengekalan OPR ini adalah menunjukkan salah satu tanda bahawa keadaan ekonomi kita ni masih kekal sihat. Sekiranya terdapat tanda-tanda kelemahan ekonomi, contohnya seperti yang kita bincangkan tadi, sekiranya aktiviti perbelanjaan itu adalah lebih perlahan, saya percaya Bank Negara sendiri akan mengambil tindakan proaktif untuk memberi sokongan kepada ekonomi dengan menurunkan OPR. Namun, bila kita lihat dari segi keadaan makronya, seperti yang saya katakan tadi, peningkatan perbelanjaan itu masih terus berlaku. Dan sekiranya OPR itu diturunkan buat masa ini, saya percaya dengan keputusan tersebut mungkin akan menggalakkan perbelanjaan yang lebih rancak dan akhirnya menyebabkan tekanan inflasi meningkat lebih tinggi daripada paras yang kita lihat sekarang. Sebaliknya, sekiranya OPR itu dinaikkan, keadaan kredit yang lebih ketat mungkin akan menyebabkan pertumbuhan ekonomi akan lebih perlahan kerana pengguna terpaksa mengurangkan perbelanjaan bagi keperluan bayaran balik yang pinjaman yang lebih tinggi. Jadi buat masa ini pada saya keputusan Bank Negara mengekalkan OPR itu pada paras 3% dilihat masih berada pada paras yang normal dan terus memberi sokongan positif kepada pertumbuhan ekonomi negara. Jadi kita tidak menyangka sebarang perubahan OPR untuk tahun ini kerana kekuatan ekonomi itu diimbangi dengan tekanan inflasi yang masih tidak terlalu tinggi.
Dan penganalisis juga menjangka kadar itu akan kekal sehingga ke hujung tahun. Tapi kalau kita lihat kepada keyakinan Bank Negara mengenai prestasi ekspor yang akan menyokong pertumbuhan ekonomi tahun ini, adakah prestasi dagangan bulan Disember yang dikeluarkan awal minggu ini memberi gambaran sama kerana ekspor keseluruhannya meningkat kepada 5.7% tahun lalu yang mana ianya lebih perlahan berbanding peningkatan import sebanyak 13.2%. Mungkin apa ulasan Muiz tentang perbandingan antara dua ini?
Okey, bila kita lihat kenyataan dalam keputusan pelarasan OPR semalam, memang kita dapat keyakinan pertumbuhan ekonomi negara masih akan terus didorong oleh peningkatan permintaan domestik termasuk juga peningkatan ekspor negara. Bila kita lihat data yang dikeluarkan bagi bulan Disember, secara khususnya kita dapati terdapat lonjakan yang jauh lebih memberangsangkan kerana nilai dagangan ataupun nilai ekspor itu mencecah 138 bilion ringgit. Yang mana pada bulan-bulan sebelumnya kita mengharapkan purata 128 bilion ringgit itu mampu dicapai. Namun lonjakan kepada 138 bilion ini menyebabkan pertumbuhan ekspor pada bulan Disember hampir mencecah 17%. Dan ianya lebih kuat berbanding sekitar 12% pertumbuhan import. Cuma bagi tahun lalu, peningkatan import tu adalah lebih tinggi. Seperti yang dinyatakan tadi ialah 13.2% kerana didorong oleh pembelian barangan-barangan berkaitan dengan komunikasi termasuk juga dengan penubuhan pusat data ataupun data center. Namun kita dapati beberapa bulan yang lepas import ini nampaknya lebih stabil dan kita percaya dari segi imbangan perdagangan itu akan memberi kesan yang positif. Dan selain daripada peningkatan ekspor barangan E&E, kita dapati juga terdapat peningkatan ekspor minyak sawit dan juga peralatan mesin yang lain dan turut sama memberi sokongan. Cuma dari segi destinasi itu bagi saya satu sudut kita nampak ekspor ke China akhirnya memulih. dan kita mengharapkan sekiranya trend ini dapat berterusan, ini akan memberi sokongan yang lebih baik, kerana pada tahun lalu pertumbuhan ekspor negara ini lebih banyak disokong oleh peningkatan ekspor ke Amerika Syarikat, khususnya bagi barangan elektrik dan elektronik.
Seterusnya kita nak tengok kepada sentimen luaran juga yang baru-baru ini Donald Trump lantik semula untuk mempengerusi ataupun menjadi Presiden Amerika Syarikat yang buat kali kedua. Dan kalau kita lihat kepada mesej terbaru yang dibuat oleh beliau, adakah Muiz bersetuju dengan IMF yang menganjurkan pertumbuhan yang lebih baik bagi Amerika Syarikat kepada 2.7%, dan adakah ianya munasabah dan mampu dicapai melihat kepada mesej terkini Donald Trump yang masih menekankan kepada rancangan menaikkan kadar tarif import?
Ya, satu sudut memang kita sedikit bimbang kerana kenaikan tarif import ini sepatutnya akan menyebabkan kenaikan inflasi, kerana kos import bagi Amerika Syarikat itu akan menaik. Namun bila kita lihat dari segi data-data terkini, contohnya dari segi keadaan pasaran buruh dan juga jualan runcit itu sendiri masih menunjukkan keadaan yang terus menunjukkan pertumbuhan ekonomi itu adalah begitu rancak dan melebihi paras normal. Kerana kebiasaannya bagi negara seperti Amerika Syarikat ini pertumbuhannya adalah sekitar 2.3%. Dan IMF dengan unjuran 2.7% ini sebenarnya menunjukkan kadar peningkatan masih kekal sihat dan selari dengan pertumbuhan 2.8% yang diunjurkan bagi tahun lalu. Dan kalau kita lihat juga data terkini GDP Now yang diterbitkan oleh Fed sendiri, dia menjangka pertumbuhan suku akhir tahun 2024 itu dijangka sekitar 3%. Jadi ini menunjukkan masih terdapat tanda-tanda kekuatan ekonomi itu mampu diteruskan. Cuma seperti yang saya nyatakan tadi, kita perlu membezakan sebenarnya apakah yang manakah adalah retorik dan yang manakah adalah tindakan perubahan dasar sebenar yang bakal dibuat oleh pentadbiran Donald Trump. Kerana terdapat juga satu perkembangan positif apabila Donald Trump menyatakan akan melakukan pertemuan dengan Presiden Xi Jinping. Ada kemungkinan sekiranya pertemuan ini adalah memberi satu kesan yang baik. Mungkin tindakan dari segi mengetatkan dasar perdagangan itu dapat dikurangkan atau mungkin ditunda untuk tempoh yang akan datang. Jadi sekiranya ini berlaku, mungkin kita dapati perdagangan, aktiviti perdagangan tahun ini mungkin adalah lebih baik berbanding apa yang kita jangka sebelum ini.
Yang terakhir adalah Muiz, mungkin dalam jangka masa 2 minit secara ringkas, apa jangkaan Muiz mengenai tindakan FOMC pada minggu hadapan? Adakah Fed akan turunkan kadar faedah Fed Funds ataupun bagaimana pula kesannya kepada ringgit sekiranya kadar Fed Funds tidak diubah?
Okey, secara umum kita dapati pendapat pasaran menyangka keputusan pada minggu hadapan yang bakal dibuat oleh Fed ini akan mengekalkan kadar Fed Funds Rate, iaitu pada paras 4.25 ke 4.5%. Jadi kita dapati ini mungkin memberi gambaran kekuatan dolar itu akan berterusan. Untuk jangka pendek, mungkin dalam suku pertama tahun ini kami menjangka pergerakan ringgit itu mungkin akan berharga sekitar RM4.40 ke RM4.50. Kerana pada satu sudut, sekiranya Fed itu tampak semakin hampir untuk memotong, ada kemungkinan ringgit akan lebih terus mengukuh. Tapi buat masa sekarang seperti yang kita bincangkan tadi, terdapat kekuatan dalam ekonomi Amerika Syarikat itu sendiri, termasuk kebimbangan mengenai tekanan inflasi yang mungkin akan menyebabkan Fed akan menunda keputusan untuk memotong kadar faedah.
Secara ringkas, kita masih lagi dalam keadaan yang positif dan juga orang kata boleh kita kata okey, tak perlu dibimbangkan. Jadi terima kasih diucapkan kepada Abdul Muiz Murhalim, pakar ekonomi MIDF Research, dan segala perkongsian ini akan kami rangkumkan dalam semua platform digital Astro AWANI. Baik, seterusnya ASEAN memainkan peranan kritikal dalam membentuk perdagangan dan ketersambungan global sekaligus meletakkan rantau ini sebagai pemain penting dalam ekonomi global. Timbalan Perdana Menteri Singapura Gan Kim Yong berkata, potensi kolektif ASEAN disokong oleh inisiatif strategik Singapura meningkatkan kesaling hubungan dagangan di rantau penting ini.
Connectivity also relates to free trade agreements, the arrangements that we have with our neighbours, ASEAN, and with the rest of the world. Singapore has 27 free trade agreements with different parts of the world. We cover more than 90% of the world's GDP. So that is very important. But lastly, I think that we touched on just now, and that's digital connectivity. So in addition to physical connectivity and free trade agreements, we also need to be able to digitally connect up with our key trading partners. That is harder to do because it's both ends of the digital connectivity. So not just Singapore, but our destination, our intermediate points also have to be digitalized. So I think this is something that is a work in progress. We continue to work with our partners to develop and enhance their digital capability. And that's why we have the ASEAN Digital Economy Framework Agreement to help the whole of ASEAN level up their digital capability.
Kim Yong berkata demikian dalam sesi Changing Nature of Trade di World Economic Forum di Davos, Switzerland. Beliau pada masa sama menegaskan soal kelestarian turut menjadi aspek penting perdagangan di ASEAN, khususnya di Singapura. Beliau mengambil contoh inisiatif seperti lorong perkapalan hijau untuk menghubungkan pelabuhan global utama dengan penyelesaian bahan api yang mampan. Beliau turut menyeru ASEAN untuk mengintegrasikan kemampanan ke dalam usaha ketersambungan, memastikan daya saing jangka panjang sambil menangani kebimbangan alam sekitar.
Presiden Amerika Syarikat Donald Trump tampil buat pertama kali di pentas maya Forum Ekonomi Dunia WEF di Davos, Switzerland. Selain isu geopolitik, ucapan beliau turut memberi fokus kepada isu ekonomi dan inflasi. Beliau menyatakan komitmennya untuk menangani isu inflasi dan imigrasi haram sambil meningkatkan pengeluaran bahan api fosil di Amerika Syarikat. Jelasnya fokus diberikan terhadap usaha menjadikan Amerika Syarikat sebagai hub kecerdasan buatan AI dan mata wang kripto serta memperluaskan potongan cukai yang diperkenalkan semasa penggal pertama pentadbirannya.
To further unleash our economy, our majorities in the House and Senate, which we also took along with the presidency, are going to pass the largest tax cut in American history, including massive tax cuts for workers and family, and big tax cuts for domestic producers and manufacturers. And we're working with the Democrats on getting an extension of the original Trump tax cuts, as you probably know, by just reading any paper. My message to every business in the world is very simple. Come make your product in America and we will give you among the lowest taxes of any nation on earth. We're bringing them down very substantially, even from the original Trump tax cuts. But if you don't make your product in America, which is your prerogative, then very simply you will have to pay a tariff, differing amounts, but a tariff which will direct hundreds of billions of dollars and even trillions of dollars into our treasury to strengthen our economy and pay down debt. Under the Trump administration, there will be no better place on earth to create jobs, build factories, or grow a company than right here in the good old USA.
Pada masa sama, Trump menzahirkan hasrat beliau untuk menurunkan harga minyak global. Jelas Trump beliau akan berbincang dengan Arab Saudi dan OPEC bagi memastikan perkara itu direalisasikan.
And it's also reported today in the papers that Saudi Arabia will be investing at least $600 billion in America, but I'll be asking the Crown Prince, who's a fantastic guy, to round it out to around $1 trillion. I think they'll do that because we've been very good to them. And I'm also going to ask Saudi Arabia and OPEC to bring down the cost of oil. You got to bring it down, which frankly, I'm surprised they didn't do before the election. That didn't show a lot of love by them not doing it. I was a little surprised by that. If the price came down, the Russia-Ukraine war would end immediately. Right now, the price is high enough that that war will continue. You got to bring down the oil price. You got to end that war. They should have done it long ago. They're very responsible, actually, to a certain extent for what's taking place. Millions of lives are being lost.
Baik, syarikat pemula turut menjadi tumpuan di World Economic Forum 2025 di Davos, khususnya syarikat berkait kecerdasan buatan. Namun sebuah syarikat yang mengasaskan perkhidmatan AI bernama Elsa Speak bermula sebelum AI menjadi arus perdana. Dan editor kanan Najib Aroff bertemu pengasasnya Vuvan. Silakan Najib.
World Economic Forum 2025 ini bukan hanya soal isu dunia dibincangkan, tapi juga syarikat-syarikat pemula juga turut hadir untuk membawakan cerita mereka, naratif mereka ke peringkat antarabangsa dan memperkenalkan apakah tawaran penyelesaian yang mereka sediakan yang secara inovatifnya membantu masalah-masalah dunia. Dan untuk jam ini, dalam temu mual khas ini, saya berbesar hati, saya bersama dengan Vuvan, iaitu Ketua Pegawai Eksekutif Elsa Speak. Vuvan, thank you so much for joining us. First of all, let the audience know about what is Elsa Speak, basically.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for having me. So
Pleasure.
Elsa Speak is an AI English communication agent. So we help language learners around the world in speaking better English using fully AI. And what we do is we build a very hyper-personalized learning curriculum that fits with every industry that you're in, every job that you're in, every learning goals that you have. And then as you go and start learning with Elsa and speaking with Elsa, we adapt along the way to make sure that you improve better and stay engaged.
Very interesting. But what are some of the challenges did you or others, in founding Elsa Speak face when you first established Elsa Speak, and then what kind of light bulb moment in that sense that trigger you to start Elsa Speak?
So we started Elsa actually 9 years ago, before all of these AI hypes that we're hearing right now, right? So the challenges back then is very different than now. So let's say 9 years ago when I started the company, nobody believed that AI could actually help teach you English. Because they believed that, we need the human teachers because only human can understand me and give me improvements, right? Now as we see where we are right now in the world, AI can do way better than what human can do in certain areas, and it's getting smarter and smarter. So the challenges in the beginning was the skepticism, the pushback, the belief in AI. Now the challenges 9 years later is completely different. The world is moving so fast. AI is moving at unprecedented rate, right? And so the challenges right now is how fast can we adopt all of this technology to bring the best into the learners community so that we can provide them with the most engaging experience, the most fast progressing experience, right? So that's a very different challenge 9 years ago and now.
Yeah, but the language learning space in that sense is very crowded. How did you identify the specific gap, for pronunciation focused learning tools such as Elsa Speak? What convinced you that this is the demand that is out there in the market?
So the product has actually evolved quite a lot. 9 years ago, we focused a lot more on pronunciation. Now it's become a full AI communication agent. It can speak to you in a simulated learning environment. It creates role plays for you. So let's say if you are in a customer support agent and you have a very angry customers calling in, we can have the AI agent talk to you so that they can play that role, right? So the product has evolved a lot. I think in the space, again, because technology has become a commodity, you see a lot new players coming into the market. I think what really makes us addressing in the gap is that we have collected data in the last 9 years, so we know the learners really well. So we build a lot of this learning model insights that we know what makes the learners stick, what gives them the best progress. If we give them too much feedback, they get overwhelmed. If we give them too little feedback, they don't progress, right? So we build in a lot of learning design and mechanism and the gamification that make sure that we give the most important feedback at the right time, at the most relevant time as well.
All right. I want to ask for your point of view. How do you view the English proficiency basically becoming as a tool for economic mobility and also opportunity globally? Because, and if you could share with us as well, are there specific regions or groups that Elsa is having transformational journey success in that sense?
So we are at Davos here, and the big topic is about digital economy, right? And the intelligent age, right? And with this one, we are now opening the market a lot more. If you talk to a lot of companies in different parts of regions, they all think about how do we move global, right? Because the borders has become borderless at this stage. And so English communication becomes an enabler. And that's topic about reskilling in the intelligent age, right? So I think it's really important that English will help opening doors, right? And you could have your best skill and you sit in the far corner of the world, you can work for pretty much any company. But if you don't have the right English communication, it will prevent you from being integrated into the community, right? So I think that's really important to see that this mobile, global, digital economy is requiring but also enabling everybody to communicate better so that we can have a room. Just like AI, right? we're talking about the stage where everybody had to learn AI, because you either stay in the game or you stay out of the game, right? And AI is working for you, not against you, right? I think the only human that will fall behind is the people that are not interested in using AI. And communication is one, right? But there's a lot more application for AI as well.
And many in developing countries struggle, you know, to afford the quality education tools in a sense. But how does ELSA solve this problem and also give a better access to those who are in developing countries especially?
Yeah, so we actually, our biggest learners are coming from developing countries, Southeast Asia, Vietnam, Indonesia, Malaysia, like Mexico, right? So a lot of our learners are actually coming from developing countries. And the reason is, for the longest time, they don't have access to the right language learning, right? Like they can go to classroom, but they always believe that, oh, I need a native teachers to teach me English for me to speak better. Now, native English teachers is not affordable to most people, right? So even 9 years ago, my biggest mission and goal and dream is to democratize access to quality language learning to pretty much 1 billion people in the world, right? And we keep the price extremely low for people, right? Like it's barely anything, right? It's probably less than a cup of tea a day that people can afford. But then it gives you the best quality, right? When you use AI, you don't have any comparison because, oh, my friend has the best American teacher. I don't get that, right? AI is the same. They treat everybody the same. There's no discrimination against how much you pay for, right? And we give everybody the same solution regardless of like, we also give it out for free to a lot of the learner communities, like in the disadvantaged community, we give it out for free to a lot of like schools that helping disadvantaged students. So our purpose again is just really democratize the access to language learning.
I'm pretty sure when it comes to AI, in terms of speech recognition, relying heavily on user data as well. But how do you address the concern of data security among users, especially under ELSA Speak?
So first of all, in our app, right, we anonymize all of the data. We're only collecting data at the aggregate level so that we can improve the model to perform better. But we don't save any conversation, right? You can have conversation, oh, I have a difficult conversation with my boss, I want to get a salary raise. None of that conversation is even stored or shared with anybody at all. And second, the learners have full control to delete all of that data if they request ELSA to do so, right? They can say that, hey, I don't want you to use my data to improve your model, we'll delete that. So I think users have full control and we treat data privacy to the highest standard. We work with companies around the world. So we work with a lot of big enterprises to train the workforce in English communication. So we are very sensitive, right? Because the employees will be comfortable talking to us about all of the challenges they want, the conversation that they want to practice, and we don't share any of that data.
Yeah. What sort of untapped potential in that sense that you see in AI's education, I mean, beyond ELSA Speaks, for instance, and how can we improve further and how will it improve further? Will we see, eventually a traditional language learning models change to a better system in the future?
I strongly believe that the future is AI learning, right? Like, I think there's a value of traditional learning, right? Like with the teachers being there. So we actually offer AI solution into traditional classroom environment. Because teachers is still there and AI just helps you do the job better, and then you focus on getting to know the students, giving them the motivation, right? Because everybody know English is important, but teachers will be there to guide them through the benefit of it, the learning psychology of it, right? But I think the future is AI learning because only AI, I think the most important thing is AI can be hyper-personalized and adaptive. I don't think any human has that capacity, right? Because let's say if I do something wrong, AI can change it right away, the next lessons that you have to focus on. It can tailor to 1 million different learners with different goals and different jobs and different functions, right? So I think the future is definitely using AI to learn better and to be improving better.
But how do you scale the success of ELSA? Because there's going to be a lot of providers out there as well. But how do you scale the success of ELSA Speak?
You know, as I said, technology become a commodity. It's easier for people. The barrier to entry becomes smaller. I think the differentiation that we have is to really understand learners, right? And we have 9 years. We work with 60 million learners around the world. We work with thousands of enterprises. So we really understand where, at what point do learners drop out? Because self-learning is really hard, right? Everybody said they want to learn, but then a week later, 2 weeks later, they're going to drop out. So they don't see the progress. So again, understanding the learning design, the methodology behind, and building the best technology that can address that pain points, right? You have a very different pain point than I do, right? You might struggle with grammars. I might be struggling with pronunciation. The other person might just like, they know everything, but they're just very nervous in speaking. And so we have a lot of data and we have a lot of rigorous learning materials, but we also build our own technology.
Right.
And I think that's very important for us to stay ahead.
Okay, right now Elsa focus on English.
Yes.
But do you plan to expand into any other language?
I think it has always been part of our plan.
Okay.
It's just that the need for English is so big right now that we still stay focused. We want to bring the best of the English product to the learners.
True.
I think when we have more capacity and resources, we're probably going to start expanding to other languages as well.
Last but not least, your advice and word of wisdom to entrepreneurs out there, especially women who wants to embark their journey into AI development, regardless of what kind of AI and what kind of solutions they want to solve in the world.
I think you just really go pursue, if you have the need and some area of pain that you really want to scratch that itch, right? 9 years ago when I started the company, I actually don't have any AI background. And that was very hard to build an AI back then because there's no API, there's no open source, right? And I still believe in it. And you can get a lot of people around you to complement what you don't have. I think especially for women, I think we self-doubt a lot. Can I even do it? Oh no, that's beyond my capacity. Do people believe me if I'm not the expert in it? People believe what you believe in you, right? So as long as you believe in you, people will believe in you. Now, AI becomes a commodity. It's 10 times or 100 times easier now than 9 years ago to start an AI company. You do not have to be an AI expert anymore. So I think find whatever that is that you really believe in and make sure that you believe in you and everybody will believe in you.
All right, Wawan, thank you so much for that insightful discussion and also sharing with us. Okay, itu adalah diskusi, ini salah satu sahaja daripada startup atau syarikat, pemula syarikat yang ada di sini. Ada banyak lagi cerita yang insyaAllah kita akan bawakan dari masa ke masa. Sekian sahaja, saya Najib Aroff. Assalamualaikum, salam hormat.
Di dalam setiap berita yang dibawa, konteks amat penting. Cara kita mendapat berita kian berubah. Melalui media sosial maupun saluran digital yang lain serta kaca TV. Kami sentiasa membawakan yang tergempar dan terkini.
Kita ni buat sesuatu yang berbeza.
Teraskan acuan verifikasi yang diamalkan supaya setiap fakta adalah sahih. Daripada analisis pelbagai sudut yang mendalam, laporan-laporan khas dan perbincangan yang membina negara. Inklusif, suara rakyat kami ajukan. Keseimbangan persepsi kami pastikan. Kerana setiap cerita mempunyai impak yang tersendiri dan perlu dibawa dengan penelitian yang terperinci. Pastikan Astro AWANI menjadi pilihan anda tidak kira di mana sahaja anda berada. Saluran berita paling dipercayai di Malaysia.
A brand new day, a brand new stadium.
Musim kedua, lebih mencabar, lebih hebat.
Kita dah compete 4 orang. So sekarang ni kita nak pergi mana ni?
Kita nak bawa korang ke tempat yang susah-susah orang nak masuk.
Perjalanan epik menyelami Premier League.
Today challenge is
cabaran demi cabaran menanti mereka.
Masa berjalan.
Takkanlah saya nak kalah juga.
KDBL
setiap Khamis jam 11 malam di Astro dan Astro Go. KAHA, Kaplah High Council, Early Access di rumah.
Mau nak jadi amlah kau. Start hari ini, aku nentu tepat aku sendiri.
KAHA, Kaplah High Council, Early Access di rumah. Sewa dan stream on demand atau sila ke saluran 480.
Hello and welcome to Niaga Spotlight with me, Tehmina Kaoosji. Niaga Spotlight goes through the week in economic analysis and future affairs. Now, today on analysis, we're discussing data centers and ecological impact. So, it has been a fast-paced week of climate-related headlines. The ongoing World Economic Forum, WEF, in Davos released the Global Risk Report 2025. Now, this is the forum's annual survey of chief risk officers, and it actually highlighted extreme weather events as the second biggest risk in terms of severity over the next 2 years and the biggest risk to come for the coming 10 years. Meanwhile, in the United States, Donald Trump is ushered into the White House and on his first day in office pulls the US out of the Paris Climate Accords again, cancels the Biden administration's Green New Deal and also gives the green light for increased drilling for fossil fuels, declaring that the US has, quote-unquote, the largest amount of oil and gas of any country on earth, and we are going to use it, end quote. Meanwhile, ASEAN and our collective population of 683 million, and with Malaysia as ASEAN chair this year, is committed to a climate-resilient future. It's at this timely juncture which we take a deep dive into data centers and ecological impact. So, to paint the big picture, the Malaysian Investment Development Authority, MIDA, approved 12 data center projects worth 90.2 billion ringgit from 2021 to June 2024, which translates into billions of dollars in investments, driven by the growing demand for AI as well as cloud computing. However, this growth raises environmental concerns. Data centers do require substantial energy, and Malaysia's energy mix, still reliant on fossil fuels, contributes to higher carbon emissions. The big question now is, can Malaysia meet our net zero emissions by 2050 scenario via renewable energy and improved efficiency if data center investments and infrastructure continue expanding? Niaga Spotlight today focuses on evaluating the ecological cost of data center FDIs and strategies to reduce this negative climate impact. Dr. Gary William Teixeira, Adjunct Associate Professor at the Asia School of Business, and Kuwei Yang, Research Associate with Khazanah Research Institute, join me now live in the studios for this extremely timely discussion. A very good morning, gentlemen. Thank you for making time.
Good morning, Tehmina.
Fantastic. So perhaps I could open up the conversation by asking you, Gary, how can Malaysia's data center industry now balance this increasing demand for digital infrastructure? It's fantastic. We're getting all of this FDI. It's going to come to fruition. But we also have our 2050 net zero commitments. So we're right in the middle here. Where do we go from here?
Well, there's no doubt that having these data centers are a value proposition for the country, not just from the revenue that they will earn, but for the benefits, social benefits, the quality of life benefits for Malaysians themselves. So this is something we need to look at. It actually improves the efficiency with which we Malaysians live our lives. The issue really is, what are the surrounding agreements that come with the hosting of these data centers, particularly in terms of the energy that is going to be needed for running the data center and for cooling the data center. So the idea is, are these plans to plant up data centers in line with or commensurate with the growth in renewable energy resources that we have in terms of our policies like NETR, and implementing this in a balanced manner is then going to be the issue. Can we source additional renewable energy to the level that we need so that as we plant up these data centers, they can actually depend more and more on renewable energy as opposed to fossil fuel electricity?
Absolutely. I appreciate the fact that you've helped to set out the broader landscape, but digging just a little bit deeper into that. So let's talk a little more about energy mix when it comes to Malaysia. Now, globally overall, data centers are contributing currently to roughly about 1% of greenhouse gas emissions, GHGs, as we call them in short. Malaysia's energy mix is reliant anywhere between 45 to perhaps even closer to 50% on coal, which is, of course, a fossil fuel. So what has the picture been looking like, and what progress has been made in 2024, Gary, with all the stakeholder discussions which have been happening, as well as what is currently being implemented for the year ahead?
Well, the NETR, as we know it now, the Energy Transition Plan, actually does contain a work direction moving away from coal and moving towards gas as the transition fuel. As we know, gas as an electricity source has about half the emissions of coal. but it still does not. It still results in emissions that need to be dealt with, unlike renewable energy, and you may count in that renewable energy hydroelectricity, you may count solar, and increasingly you may count things like biomass and biogas, because as a country at the equator, we really need to look to our strengths, and both from the natural resource areas that we have, as well as our agricultural products. We do find that we have fairly copious amounts of biomass that we can tap into for this purpose. Some have mentioned energy from waste, but I think that that's an area that we should tread very, very carefully on.
That's right.
Since part of the waste is plastic waste, and that comes from petrochemicals as well. So it is a fossil fuel if you are doing waste energy from plastics.
So biomass definitely is something that is easily accessible and at the same time exploitable without too many downside risks. All right, well heard on that. Thanks so much for that. Now, coming into me moving to Wei Yang. Now, Wei Yang, tell us a little bit about the recent research article which you've authored by Khazanah Research Institute, and what was the overall thought process about putting that out in this point in time. And it's very crucial, of course, adding to the discourse that is growing around the subject about responsible and sustainable investments for data centers.
Well, the article was meant as a short piece to spark conversations around the environmental impact of data centers, because as we see, a lot of this investment coming in may or may not be assessed or being as transparent. And we see there are many economic opportunities of that are claimed to be brought in by data centers, but there are also things that we have to look closer at, especially on the downsides, and we want to see whether the risk that data centers can brought onto both our ecology and as well as our functioning of our energy system, whether those can balance out the benefits that they brought in. So
Absolutely. So that is it in a nutshell. However, now let's move into how Malaysia can look at developing then and implementing also, very importantly, impactful climate policies that will specifically then address this growing energy consumption of data centers. We're already in 2025 to meet some of our targets by 2030. What can be done already this year?
Well, one thing to know about data centers, and as we all know, data centers uses a lot of energy. Some of the larger ones, like hyperscale data centers, can use anywhere between 20 to hundreds of megawatts. The larger ones even use enough power to power up a whole small city. Data centers are also qualitatively different in their energy usage because they have to operate around the clock.
Very true. It's a 24/7, 365 kind of scenario. No breaks at all.
Definitely there will be implications on our power system, no doubt. But right now, the industry standard metric for sustainability and performance is what we call a power usage effectiveness, PUE. And this is an this is an efficiency measure that measures how much energy that feeds the data center actually goes into power the computing resource alone, which is called the IT load. And the closer your facility is to 1 PUE, the more efficient you are. But we have to bear in mind that this is an internal efficiency measure. It tells us nothing about the ecological impacts, how much emissions these energy use entail, where these energy sources come from. And the emphasis on using efficiency as a sustainability metric also has its own implications, because we know that the efficiency improvements over the past decade has been matched by the increased demand, computing demand. And this has kept the energy use level around 1% globally. But the recent trend of AI, especially large language models, which was unforeseen just less than a decade ago, actually would buck this trend because of the sheer amount of energy it uses in their training and inference phase. So we're saying that some estimates already said that AI-powered Google searches actually uses 9 times more energy than traditional Google searches. And as more AI companies are rushing to integrate AI into their services, we would expect to see more of these traditional energy usage being amplified.
Exactly, and I'd just like to also point out, you made a really interesting fact there, and this was something which was trending a little bit on social media just in the first weeks of January, the fact that actually when you look into a Google search today, it automatically actually gives you an AI outcome. Yes. So unless you specifically go in and request for it to be minus AI, you're actually going to be inadvertently always using AI if you're using Google, right?
But coming back to what it meant, what this would mean for the national climate policy and as well as other energy policies especially, this is also a problem of managing common pool resource. Because data centers, they come in, they are also sharing the utility with millions of other users, including low-income households, low-band consumers like you and I, and who rely on the grid for their day-to-day energy use. So there is a genuine risk that these large energy users would lead to an imbalance in the power system. And at times of crisis, especially as energy transition is picking up pace, in times of crisis, which is there is a non-zero chance of a power failure happening when you have high imbalances in the power system. In such times when the utility has to make a decision between saving certain people and cutting off certain people, this what is known as an under-frequency load shedding. Those decisions of whose energy security it is to prioritize would be very critical. And I think policy has to come in at the intersection of this and say that, oh, there are certain social bottom line that we cannot cross, and put in safeguards and cushion the effects on lower marginalized vulnerable groups that uses the same energy as those larger users.
Absolutely. What is really standing out to me is the fact that regulatory measures need to be able to sort of balance incentivizing energy efficiency without stifling that technological growth. And just to draw that broader landscape, because that's also a statistic that stood out to me, the recent California wildfires, which of course were covered widely in news. Now, an interesting point to note is that California, the entire state alone, it actually has about 50 data centers over there. Johor, for example, closer to home, about 52 data centers, both in plan as well as those who are already operational. Selangor, we are close to 30 data centers. So once again, talking about the mix and, of course, the usage of water, especially as a critical cooling agent, so much to actually go through. Thanks very much for that, Wei Yang. Right, Gary, now moving into looking at the context of Malaysia's evolving climate policies, Netter, as you've already briefly touched upon. So how can now data centers adopt energy-efficient technologies? Let's dig a little deeper into the science, as well as some of the renewable energy sources, without disproportionately increasing their operational costs, because that, of course, will be key to whether or not we're going to see vast adoption and resistance to any directives by regulatory bodies.
Yeah, thank you for that question. Now, that is a big question because it pulls together a number of different areas. First of all, if you're talking about the energy source in the first place, we are in a process where we are transitioning away from coal. We're transitioning more towards gas. At the same time, we are planting up as much solar PV as possible, while trying to maximize the use of the power generation from all of our hydroelectric facilities. There are not that many of them on the peninsular side, but certainly, of course, the area for growth of data centers you haven't mentioned yet is Sarawak. So that's sort of the third area apart from KL, to some extent Penang, but the big growth is Johor and now those areas. So you need to generate electricity efficiently, you need to dispatch it efficiently, and you also need to, once again, look at the data centers themselves, which have undergone, in the last 10 years even, the method of cooling, from cooling the entire building to actually cooling the chips themselves.
Yes, the hub itself.
The hub itself. So we're looking at quantum increases in the efficiency of cooling, but as Wei Yang has pointed out, that has sort of kept pace with the growth in demand. So it's been fairly flat. The idea really is that in terms of the additional policies, what it is that we need are the technologies that Petronas is looking into now, for example, not using water, but using different types of non-water coolants,
yeah.
to cool some of these things down. They've collaborating with other companies that develop different types of coolants that are suitable for use in these sorts of data centers as energy carriers to cool the systems down. There are fringe benefits as well, even as we are competing for electricity use with the general public. And as Yang very importantly pointed out, there is a hierarchy of whom you disenfranchise first.
Exactly.
Obviously, infrastructure, hospitals, pumping stations for water,
critical public services,
communication services. All of these things will require that they be very high on the priority list, and you might find that it's other types of industries that end up paying the price for some of these things, and perhaps part of the population. But I think that there's huge scope for new areas of growth for renewable energy sources, particularly, as I mentioned earlier, with respect to biomass. And even there's a broad range. You have direct combustion, which is very inefficient and produces a lot of pollution. And there are newer gasification technologies, pyrolysis technologies, and biochar, for example, policies that you can use. You can extract syngas from biomass. You can extract some liquid, usable liquids from them, and then the remainder is biochar, which avoids the carbon dioxide cycle because you're heating it in the absence of oxygen. You don't get carbon dioxide, you get carbon, and at worst case scenario, it's a fuel, it's a biofuel.
That's right.
But best case scenario, as a carbon capture and storage mechanism, and in Malaysia are putting the act together right now for carbon capture, use and storage, you can entomb this biochar in concrete. You can apply it to agricultural soils. There are a number of other uses, and the methodologies already exist with certification agencies like Vera. For using biochar to sequester carbon and to store carbon in this way. And this is atmospheric carbon that we're putting away. So in the situation, somewhat unwanted perhaps, that we end up using more gas, it's still a fossil fuel. Those emissions can actually be offset to some degree by extracting carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and storing it in this high density form.
So there are options that are already on the table. And when it comes to the government harmonizing it from their side, what are your thoughts on the government's recent green tax incentives for energy efficient industries? Do you feel that is actually going to help with encouraging this shift without too much of significant financial strain?
Absolutely. There's no doubt about it. The ministries, to their credit, have been communicating more with each other.
Sure.
We, of course, have NRES, which we need to be in there. The Ministry of Communications and Multimedia needs to be in there. Petra, managing our energy supply, needs to be in there. Even ministries like MITI that are involved in bringing in the investment and keeping track of, what the conditions are for these investments. These investments come in partially because our energy costs are low, but they also come in because they expect a certain amount of renewable energy in that, and they expect continued progress towards lower carbon energy generation, and they in fact require that all of the sustainability criteria, whether they are social criteria, whether they're environmental criteria, now need to be filled, especially as we move into a global standard for reporting on sustainability.
Absolutely, especially as standards get not only, I would say, stricter, but a little more transparent as well. And of course, that brings up the opportunity for partnering with renewable energy providers. And would there be a chance for also solar energy to actually play a bigger role when it comes to the renewable energy mix, given that, well, when we looked at 2022, our solar energy potential was estimated at roughly 17,000 megawatts or so. just given the fact that we are, the land of almost continuous sunshine, wouldn't it also make sense to simultaneously expand that together with biomass?
Absolutely. It's a no-brainer. If I'm going to put in a data center, which is essentially a large building, like a warehouse, with a flat roof,
yes.
Okay, it just makes perfect sense to coat as much of that surface as possible with solar to try to defray the cost of energy for that building. The issue is that the energy density coming from solar, if you were to compare it to hydroelectricity, or you compare it to biomass or waste to energy, and particularly if you compare it to nuclear, the energy density is fairly low. And so just to power the data center, you need not just that roof, but several square kilometers perhaps around that same building to be plastered with solar panels at the current level of efficiency that they're running at, of course. And we're constantly pushing the boundary on the efficiency of solar panels as well. We need to think about that as well and plan it into the future. So, growth in efficiency is something that we can plan for. At the same time, we need to plan for increases in demand and, concurrently, expectations for the quality of the services and products that we deliver to fulfill sustainability requirements at the same time, ESG requirements, etc.
Exactly. So overall, what I'm gathering is that, on one hand, you've got the cost-effective, sustainable power source quandary, but it also needs to meet somewhere halfway with the fact that ought there to be a cap for looking at Malaysia's ecological landscape and how many more data center projects, for example, we are able to accept. A couple of really key issues.
Yeah, there are examples out there. Very recently, Singapore put a moratorium on data centers between, I believe it was 2019 and 2023, something like that. And when they decided that they were able to continue with the process, then they lifted the moratorium. So there's something to be said about being able to have that avenue for your planning. It's not, once we put something down, people were committed and we're locked in.
And it's unlimited.
Exactly.
Thank you. Thanks very much for that, Gary. So we'll come back into the discussion right after a quick break. Don't go anywhere. Stay with us right here on Niaga Spotlight.
Merentasi Laut Cina Selatan hingga ke puncak Kinabalu, kami bawakan laporan ringkas, padat dan komprehensif. 5 minit Awani Sabah Plus setiap Khamis dan Jumaat 8.25 malam hanya di Astro Awani.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Assalamualaikum Negeri Sembilan. 1 Februari ini, semua dijemput datang beramai-ramai ke Masjid Sri Sendayan untuk mengimarahkan tazkirah malam Jumaat dengan ustaz dan ustazah yang disegani.
InsyaAllah.
Meriah lain macam dengan tradisi mantai dan pelbagai aktiviti bersama selebriti kami.
Yang jauh kita dekatkan, yang dekat kita mesra-mesrakan.
Mari meraih keberkatan.
Saya sahkan penceraian ini.
Nokta sebuah perkahwinan.
Saya minta maaf, saya bukanlah wanita yang awak perlukan.
Hanya lepas saya ceraikan Alina, I terus boleh kahwin dengan you.
You giving me so much pressure. I dah penatlah.
Kemunculan membawa persaingan.
I tak sukalah Alina jadi auditor division di company. Kalau di pejabat, awak adalah klien saya. Dan di luar pejabat, you're nobody.
Jurang tanpa niat, Isnin hingga Khamis di Astro Ria dan Astro Go.
Di era digital, pemasaran bukan hanya tentang penjualan semata-mata. Penceritaan menarik jadi kekuatan dalam membina hubungan perniagaan, tingkat pengetahuan, perkasakan perniagaan anda. Saksikan segmen Jiwa SME dalam program Awani Pagi dan Niaga Awani setiap Isnin hingga Khamis di saluran 501. Dibawakan oleh penaja utama jelajah Jiwa SME, Unify Business, rakan digital pilihan anda.
Welcome back to Niaga Spotlight. Still with me, Tehmina Kaoosji. And today, of course, we are continuing the discussion on data centers and ecological impact with our guests live in the studio. Gary, thanks very much for those points that you made there, particularly on the expansion of data centers and about the potential cap. Also being cognizant to the fact that because of Singapore's moratorium, that's also what increased the outflow and the FDI investment into Johor, the next closest landing point, which has soared to about 52 data centers in all. Wei Yang, now integrating the conversation with a couple of perspectives of Malaysia's commitment to achieving our carbon neutral target by 2050. What are some thoughts that you have around specific climate policy frameworks that can actually be introduced to, of course, once again, ensure that this expansion of data centers is not going to be undermining our carbon emission goals?
So in terms of emissions reduction target, our internationally pledged target is to reach a carbon intensity of 45% below the 2005 level by 2030. The carbon neutrality and net zero emissions by 2050 is something that informed domestic policymaking but has not made it to international pledges yet. So that would be a bit more immediate than the 2050 target. But it doesn't mean it's not important. So because the emissions, the target that we have set for ourselves is in terms of carbon intensity, it is actually a quotient of emissions against GDP. So it's a relative measure and it doesn't really indicate absolute emission reduction. We gave ourselves a little bit more flexibility that way. The way to hit those targets is to always keep your GDP growth, your denominator larger than your emissions growth. So when talking about data centers, we have to take into account the carbon intensity of these facilities as well. But the carbon intensity of data centers are dependent on their scope 2 emissions, which is their connection to the grid, the power utility. And the ability for these data centers to meet net zero emissions, take your target, is entirely dependent on how fast we can transition away from fossil fuel-based power generation, as well as our performance in carbon sink conservation in Malaysia. And one of the issues is that it is unclear whether our energy transition planning has taken into account of the data centers' energy demand forecast when they're doing it. So, but then in other countries, you have seen that the surge in data centers industry have already made their previous energy demand forecast completely obsolete. So
we could take a couple of lessons from there, right?
Yes, yes.
Perhaps could we be looking at carbon emission caps for data centers? Would that perhaps be a useful parameter whereby which to proceed?
Well, exactly the point, because data centers themselves rely on the power grid that they're connected to reach an emissions target. So one way that they can sort of hit those targets without the performance of our energy transition is that they use something we call an energy attribute. RECs, renewable energy certificates. These actually allow the data center operators to buy claims that they have used renewable energy and therefore offset their scope 2 emissions. But in reality, they are using the same power source that comes from our grid, which is at around 70 to 80% fossil fuel. And so this is essentially accounting problem, because the corporate accounting process and the national carbon accounting process are different in their approaches, and it is essentially keeping two tabs. And you have you can have a situation where the corporate the data center is saying that, oh, we have already reached carbon neutrality, but the national account, which is reported by our government to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, in our biannual report, our national GHG inventory, you can have the national account still counting those emissions produced by the power utility itself. So there needs to be a harmonization there needs to be bridging of those different accounting processes. And one way to do that would be we need more accounting transparency using a harmonized carbon accounting framework nationally and corporate, perhaps using something like a residual grid mix emissions reporting. And legislatively, that would mean that we might need climate change. We might need an act that that require these standards, but we also have to bear in mind that making carbon accounting and reporting mandatory can be a strain on small businesses, and as well as setting off another set of problems.
Most certainly. But of course, bringing it back into policies, perhaps, would it make sense to enforce a policy requiring data centers to source a certain percentage, let's say 30% of their energy from renewables by 2030? Because that might also help to harmonize in line with Malaysia's target to achieve about 31% of our renewable energy for total electricity mix by 2025. And that's this year, right?
Yeah.
Well, I suppose we could try to align those proportions,
right,
so that as we grow, as I mentioned, our supply of renewable electricity, which is scope 2, as you mentioned, for the data centers, we can actually then comply with perhaps some of these directives, and they may come from the investors themselves, or we may actually require them from our own policies and regulations. And regulations are where it's at, precisely. We have the Securities Commission now coming up with the National Sustainability Reporting Frameworks. And these actually do require public listed companies that are generating over 200 billion ringgit in revenue to actually begin submitting reports this year in 2025. For public listed companies below that level, they need to begin submitting these reports next year. And for non-public listed companies, as long as you're over 200 billion ringgit, you still have to begin reporting. I think it's 2027. And it's a window that you have. You can begin reporting only scope 1 and scope 2, but eventually by the end of the window, 2 years from now, 2025 to 2027, if you're a large public listed company with a high revenue, you need to be reporting all 3 scopes. But as you mentioned, the key scope here is scope 2, purchased energy, purchased electricity. Central Bank has been very, very clear, very transparent, and very forward with this. The JC3 together, Central Bank and the Securities Commission, aligning the reporting requirements. And as Asia School of Business, we are the training arm of Central Bank.
That's right.
Our ties and collaboration with MIT have actually given us some of the tools that we're currently helping the private sector out to utilize these tools, even as the central bank imposes requirements and regulations on the banking industry. The data centers don't exist in a vacuum. They exist
naturally.
In an ecosystem.
It's an entire ecosystem.
Entire ecosystem.
Right?
So there's going to be a lot of capex. There's going to be a lot of opex that Malaysian companies, and I'm sure that when we have these investments, we require a certain amount of local content. Jobs for Malaysians, products and services provided by Malaysia in the construction, planning, construction, operation, maintenance of these facilities. All of these things need to be part of that ecosystem and need to are necessarily stimulated, enabled, facilitated by the banking regulations and the financial regulations as well. So we'll find that there are a whole suite of sectors that involved in the support and the running of these data centers. So it's not just energy and water that we need to look at. It's the social aspects, the workforce, etc. that need to be. And this is where the training comes in. And I'm sure you'll be moving into that as well. But all these things are really big picture scenarios that we need to look at, and we need to get down in some detail if we are to understand them, plan for the risks, and then manage the risks.
Very true. Planning for the risks and then managing the risks, of course, and the further role, perhaps, Gary, which the Malaysian government could be playing in creating regulatory frameworks or even furthering the incentive structures. Your thoughts on that? And Malaysia is also in a at a very interesting juncture where we've just taken on stewardship of ASEAN as the chair. What are the opportunities here to not only look at how we are going to set up our ecosystem for comprehensive and sustainable FDI investments for data centers, but perhaps even setting an example for the entire region?
It works both ways. As chair of ASEAN in this go-around, I think lots of opportunities for increasing the amount of collaboration between our ASEAN member states. As you know, we already have interconnections between Singapore and Malaysia, Malaysia and Thailand in terms of electricity. That's something certainly that we can grow as the renewable energy industry grows in our neighbors as well. Thailand also ramping up RE production. If they have a surplus, etc., we are already selling electricity to Singapore. There are plans for accessing an interconnection between Sumatra and Peninsular Malaysia as well. There's talk of coming from Kalimantan and Sarawak across to Singapore and others. And even if you follow some of the longest range energy transfers from Northern Australia moving to Singapore. So, you know, some of these costs are very, very high. But once again, as the climate imperative becomes more and more important, then what we will find is that the cost of inaction, of not accessing these collaborations with our ASEAN neighbors is actually going to be overshadowed by the fact that we as ASEAN and as a region of the world that's particularly vulnerable and exposed to climate impacts end up spending more and more resources on combating loss and damage rather than channeling these into adaptation and low energy and high efficiency power generation. So as a collection of countries, I think that this presents a unique opportunity. There are countries that are high consumers of energy. There are countries that have very, very large agro industries that produce a lot of organic waste that can actually be put into RE production. So I think it's a golden opportunity, and I think all the ASEAN leaders know this, particularly with respect to the fact that regardless of what President Trump does, in the end, we are going to be in a situation where we can more effectively use our resources if we share them. So electricity is something that is difficult to store, expensive to store. You know, we have battery storage. But if we can dispatch it to where it's needed, if we have surpluses, then we'll find that the entire region is going to benefit from a higher efficiency of use of these resources.
Absolutely. I mean, I can't think of a more collaborative approach and a topic to start on than this when it comes to ASEAN actually sharing resources. Thanks very much, Gary. Wei Yang, now digging a little deeper into how can KRI's findings then be perhaps leveraged to create a more data-driven and also performance-based regulatory environment, especially so that data centers can remain operational while minimizing ecological impacts. We're talking about those extreme weather conditions. We've, of course, experienced a spate of continuing flash flood impacts that these days, as compared to even, let's say, 5 to 6 years ago, are affecting multiple states across Malaysia, right? So this is just one example of perhaps a dire emergency case scenario.
Just want to harken back to what Dr. Gary had said about the, it's related, the ecosystem around data centers, and they do not exist in a vacuum because data centers essentially are part of a larger socio-ecological system. And so like any other economic activities, it uses economic resources, common pooled resources that are also used by other actors within the system. And they are certainly very important for a lot of ecological functions, like water would be important when we see when we see risk of droughts. So they are also important for building social resilience against climate impact in a sense. But data centers, they differ in that they use disproportionately more of these resources than other activities. Right now, with climate impacts, we sort of have to assume that they will continue, even regardless of the global temperature, because even if we hold the global temperature at a certain level, the long lifetime of carbon emissions in the atmosphere and their influence towards the climate system can actually still impose climate impacts on society long after we have held the temperature steady at 1.5, for example. So we have to assume the worst and plan accordingly, and that means to have cross-sectoral collaboration and looking at things more holistically, especially when international actors right now are unreliable to
but that's all right. ASEAN as a collective actor has a lot more market share and also population. And we're double, triple almost.
Our other trading partners, for example, Australia, EU, Japan, Korea, as far as we know, they're still fairly well committed to the issue of sustainability. Some of them are very highly impacted by climate events.
Exactly. 2024 was a record year for climate impacts, hottest year on record as well, right? Yes, Wei Yang.
So as for whether there is a policy framework or regulatory environment that would be feasible for this sort of cross-sectoral planning, it really needs to take into account of different sectors. Like the energy planning needs to go hand in hand with water sector management, needs to go hand in hand with land use planning. And a lot of times these are separate jurisdictions, but they are functionally interconnected. So there needs to be a national strategy. A high-level national strategy would be very important when it comes to providing a vision and a traceable target and a pathway towards climate resilient development. So for KRI, we have in the just past year produced a report that looks deeper at these issues on certainly national climate strategy, climate justice, adaptation governance that provides like a holistic view on things and landscaping. So that would be my interest of the audience.
All right. Thanks very much for that, Wei Yang. And Gary, moving into getting some key points about how data center operators themselves can possibly integrate climate resilience strategies into their design and operational models so that they are playing their part as well for ensuring long-term sustainability while minimizing business interruptions.
Yes, so once again, when it comes to cutting-edge technologies, there are a lot of proposals out there. So one of those is actually using non-water coolants.
That's right.
There are other options depending on where the data center is sited. If it's sited perhaps within an industrial park, then perhaps there is actually a need for heated water, from a data center that can actually be sold to a neighboring factory or industry or something like that that can utilize the fact that this water is actually above ambient temperature and will actually need less energy to heat if hot water or steam is what is needed. So the idea really is, about the circular economy, about integrating needs and thinking about the waste products, not so much as waste, but as other kinds of resources that can actually be capitalized upon. And this idea of having peers and having a peer-to-peer network to move these things back and forth. For example, if the factory next door is perhaps a wood products factory, perhaps they have wood waste, perhaps they have their own boiler, generate their own steam.
Right.
Perhaps they're a self-generating electricity plant as well, and many of the industrial parks and factories do have, indeed, generate their own electricity. They can't operate without a surplus.
Definitely.
So the idea then that recently the Tenaga Nasional has actually endorsed this idea of peer-to-peer sharing of energy means that then data centers, perhaps as part of an ecosystem of other types of industries, can begin sharing information back and forth. I mean, it's not limited in that scale if you are located next to a neighborhood, for example, and and people go to work every day. Their houses are actually dormant. The only thing that's probably running is the fridge and the internet. All right, and they have rooftop solar. Perhaps the idea is that those can actually go back to the grid and just take a short hop over to the data center, for example. So the concept of integration and circular economy actually do come together in this space. And you actually have to be creative in thinking about it. It's not as if there aren't barriers to these things. Some of these are safety barriers, some are practicality barriers. But in the end, if we have a focus and once again, we are supported both from a technological aspect as well as from a financial aspect, we can actually begin getting these things on the ground. From the financing side, certainly banks are far more open nowadays.
That's right.
They've hired and brought on board their own suite of experts in the fields of chemical engineering, the fields of electrical engineering, because they themselves are now under requirements from central bank to assess all of these OPEX and CAPEX loans.
That's right. Yeah. Dr. Gary, thank you so very much for that really comprehensive roundup of, the direction into which we're heading, and Wei Yang for all your insights regarding how the ecological impact needs to be framed from a much wider picture, not just data centers alone. It's been an excellent discussion, and thank you very much for making the time today.
Thank you, Tehmina. It's a pleasure.
Well, that's all we have time for today on Niaga Spotlight. Wishing everyone a productive week ahead. I'm Tehmina Kaoosji signing off for now. We'll see you again next Friday with more economic analysis and insights.